Hey, it's Luke with Auto Darts. This is our Talon Claw 4 tips and tricks and tuning video. I'm going to walk you through some of the basic operations that you may want to do as an owner of one of these Talon Claws, whether you built it yourself, bought it from somebody else, or you bought one from us. The first tip is to remember that our blasters are printed in PLA. Now, PLA is a great material. It's very strong. It's a really wonderful material to work with and print with, but it does have some restrictions as far as heat. You don't want to leave this blaster in a really hot car. You don't want to leave it out in direct sun for extended periods of time in hot environments like Hawaii or Texas during the summer. We generally don't see a lot of problems with this despite tens of thousands of prints sold. And if you ever do have a problem and it's one of our prints, please do shoot us an email and we'll help you out. Let's start by swapping our barrel. It's quite simple to remove the barrel on this blaster. Depending on the version you've got, your newer versions won't have flathead screws. This is an older version of the kit, but you're going to unscrew this one screw. You're going to unscrew this screw right here just a little bit, and that will loosen and free up your barrel to remove it. At this point, you can swap it with another barrel type, reinsert, make sure it's fully inserted all the way back. And while you're holding that in, you want to hold this all the way back before you tighten down this screw to ensure that it's fully seated in the base of the blaster. The Talon Claw is a great blaster to travel with because it's already reasonably small. You pretty much just need to remove the stock, and this is going to fit in just about any suitcase. So the only other thing I could see removing is the barrel, and to do that, like we show in the other bit, it's simply remove the single screw here, and you can pull your barrel free. That'll shorten you up by a few inches depending on the length of your barrel, especially if you've got a longer barrel. Then you'll want to remove your stock. If you've got one of these worker stocks, it's simply a single screw here, which is the stop to not allow the stock to fall off completely. And then you're going to press the release and pull the stock all the way out. In a matter of seconds, you've broken down this blaster to a really tight, compact package that'll fit in virtually any suitcase out there. Never fly with these in your carry-on, of course, only in your checked baggage. Since the Talon Claw 4 is a high-performance blaster, it's generally important not to dry fire the blaster. Dry firing being priming the blaster and pulling the trigger while there are no darts in there. Because there are no darts in the blaster, the plunger head will hit forward very hard, causing a lot of extra stress on the blaster. The easiest way to deprime is to simply hold this very rigidly in the backwards position and expect force to push forward as you pull the trigger, and then simply deprime like that. Another way to deprime is to plug up the end securely and allow the air brake nature of the good air seal to actually take some of that stress. Now I'm going to show you how to swap the spring. Now, if you have one of these worker stocks, the first step is going to be to remove this screw right here, remove this screw from the underside right here. This is simply a stop to stop the stock from working its way out. Then we're going to hit the stock release here, and we're going to slide that all the way back out, and we can set that aside for now, keeping track of this little screw. Next, we're going to hold the back here and offer some support while pulling out this rear pin. This takedown pin is what allows us access to everything in the blaster. If you've got a little clip on this second takedown pin, you can go ahead and pull that out, and then flip it around and pull that pin out as well. Depending on your spring, you will have some pre-compression here, but this one doesn't have much at all, given that it's a custom fit spring. At that point, you can pull the spring all the way out, take a different spring that you'd like to install the spring, return the butt plate back on, and reinsert both of your pins, followed by one of these clips if you are using one of these on the other side. Finally, you can reinstall your stock and you are good to go. Now I'm going to show you how to clean and lubricate your plunger tube. As you use the blaster over time, especially if you're in a dusty or dirtier environment, like a park where you've got dirt on the ground, every time you put a new dart in here, if it's a used dart that's seen dirt and has dust and grime on it, you're going to eventually get some of that work its way back into the plunger tube. It may take a matter of years, but it really depends on your play style. So first we're going to remove the stock. If you've got one of these worker stocks, you've got a single screw right here. This stop prevents the stock from sliding out. Then we're going to hit this release to pull your stock out, set that aside. Now we're going to remove the 2 pins, including this clip. We'll drop that pin out, and applying a little pressure to this side to hold the thing together, we're going to pull this top pin out and finally remove the butt plate. After that, we can pull the spring. Then we're going to tilt the blaster down, pull the trigger, and you're going to grab the actual plunger head itself and pull that out and set aside. Now, should you decide that more of this needs cleaning, you can remove these 2 screws here and that entire assembly will come out. I also show that later in the video for replacing the O-rings here. But for now, I'm going to leave that intact, and I'm going to simply take a piece of paper towel. And you can either use a barrel, you could use a long screwdriver, you could maybe even get away with using your spring, but I'm just going to put this on the barrel, and I'm going to kind of rotate this around, and I'm going to get all of the lubricant out of there. Any other gunk, you can see I'm getting a few little bits of 3D printed filament that have initially worked their way clean. And once you've got that as clean as you like, you can clean it out a couple times. Then we're going to take our plunger head and we're going to clean this up too. So all I'm doing is removing any dirt, grime, grease. You can remove the O-ring if it really needs some work, but I generally just wipe it all clean. And then I'm going to put some slug slime back on this O-ring to put fresh lubricant into the plunger tube. You can add a little bit to the plunger tube itself if you like. And then we're going to pull the trigger a couple times here to get that back into place. We'll replace our spring and then replace our butt plate. Insert our pins. Reconnect this little clip if you're using these clips, and reinstall our stock and replace the locking screw on the stock. And there we go. After we've cleaned the plunger tube, it's nice to move it around a bit to redistribute some of that lubricant to make sure it's getting on all of the O-rings in the entire plunger tube itself. Next, I'll show you how to replace the O-rings on your actual ram. Now you can see inside here, there's a single O-ring here that is on that ram. And to replace those, there's a couple ways to do it. First, you could technically prime the blaster, and if you can manage to get your fingers in there, remove the existing O-ring, and work around there and install it, you can do it. It is possible, but it is a bit of work, and you've got to kind of work blind with your fingers there. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you feel comfortable doing so off the bat. So we're going to show you the standard way of doing it. First, we're going to want to remove the stock if you're using one of these worker stocks, and that's just a single locking screw here. We'll set that aside carefully, and then we'll push on the release here and we'll remove our stock completely. Next, we're going to remove this pin and this pin. So I'll remove this clip here. Pull that pin out. Make sure you give this a little bit of pressure and you're holding onto this, because if you've got some pre-compression, you can have this actually pop out on you. Set your butt plate aside, set your spring aside. Next, we're going to remove the 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now you see flathead screws here, but we no longer use flatheads on any of the parts, so you won't have flatheads if you bought a kit anytime recently. While you're doing this, your 4 nuts may fall out. They slot into these 4 slots here. You can just set them aside for now while we're working on the blaster. Now that those are loose, we'll be able to push the entire assembly out. So we can actually just push on the bars up here and the entire assembly will pop back out. Now that we've got this assembly out, we can simply pull off the O-ring and replace it with a new one. Now that we've got that O-ring off, we'll put our new one back on. Always a little awkward doing this in floating air in front of the camera. Once that's in place, you've got 2 options as far as lubricant. You can use slug slime, but our current recommendation for this O-ring is Super Lube. Super Lube's a little thicker, it will last a little bit longer and give you a better seal over time, at least a more consistent one. There's nothing wrong with using slug slime, you certainly can do that as well. I like to give that a couple rotations, and then we're going to reassemble everything we just did in reverse. Now, you may find inserting these a little bit finicky. I would highly recommend pointing the blaster downwards. It'll let you get those in there a little bit easier. That is really hard to show on camera. And once you can get those sort of worked in, the whole assembly will be ready to insert back in. To get this to pass through, you're gonna have to pull the trigger a few times. And then you're gonna wanna guide those back into the grip, replace your spring. You can replace the butt plate and reinstall those pins. Lastly, we'll line up our grip here so those holes line up, and we'll drop our 4 nuts back in place. And reinstall the 4 screws holding the pump arms in place. And that's all of our tips and tricks for the Talon Claw 4. Now, if you have any other ideas or tips or tricks we haven't mentioned, I would love to hear from you in the comments. We're always looking to improve, and because these videos are on our second channel, we're not as concerned about re-uploading them. So if you come up with a good idea in the comments, we will film it, add it to this video, and then ultimately republish. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm out of darts.